The Alpha rejected me. Then the Legendary Lycan King chose me instead. Why would one Alpha reject someone, only for the Legendary Lycan King to choose that same person instead? What could possibly lead to such a dramatic change in fate? Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you love emotional werewolf romance filled with destiny, loyalty, and unforgettable twists, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Thank you so much for your continued support. Your encouragement inspires us to keep bringing you powerful stories every week. Before we begin, tell us in the comments. If you had to choose, would you follow your heart or your pride? Now settle in, relax, and let us return to where this remarkable journey first began. The cruelest wounds are often delivered by the people who once promised to stand beside you. Silver moonlight spilled across the ancient stone courtyard of Black Hollow Pack, washing every weathered pillar and polished banner in a pale glow that felt almost sacred. Lanterns flickered gently in the cool evening breeze, casting soft circles of golden light over rows of gathered wolves dressed in their finest ceremonial clothing. Somewhere beyond the walls, crickets sang beneath towering pines, while the distant rush of a mountain stream blended into the quiet rhythm of the night. Everything about the annual mate bond ceremony whispered of destiny, tradition, and hope. Evelyn Carter stood alone at the edge of the gathering, smoothing invisible wrinkles from the simple ivory dress she had spent weeks sewing by hand. It wasn't embroidered with silver thread like the elegant gowns worn by the daughters of wealthy alpha families. There were no sparkling gemstones resting against her neck, no jeweled crown woven through her chestnut hair. She had only delicate wildflowers braided into loose curls, gathered herself that very morning from a meadow just beyond the pack's northern fence. Their faint scent of lavender and white clover clung to her sleeves whenever the wind shifted. She preferred it that way. The flowers reminded her that beautiful things could bloom unnoticed. Around her, laughter rose and fell in warm waves, though none of it reached her. Small circles of conversation naturally formed everywhere except where she stood. Familiar faces glanced toward her before quickly looking away, as though acknowledging her presence required more effort than simply pretending she wasn't there. Evelyn had grown accustomed to those silent exclusions long ago. They hurt less now, or at least she had learned how to carry the weight without letting anyone see it. Tonight was supposed to be different. Every young wolf in the pack waited for this ceremony. It marked the beginning of futures imagined since childhood, futures filled with partnership, purpose, and belonging. For years, Evelyn had quietly believed that whatever loneliness she carried might finally end beneath the blessing of the full moon. Not because she dreamed of luxury or power, but because she longed for a place where someone would choose her without hesitation. Across the courtyard, Alpha Damian Blackridge emerged from the grand hall wearing the formal black coat reserved only for pack leaders. Conversations immediately softened into respectful silence. He carried himself with effortless confidence, his broad shoulders squared, every measured step reminding everyone why Black Hollow followed him without question. Moonlight reflected along the silver clasp resting over his heart, while members of the council nodded proudly as he passed. Evelyn watched him from a distance, her heartbeat quietly matching the slow rhythm of the ceremonial drums beginning to echo through the valley. She remembered the countless times they had crossed paths growing up. They had never been close, yet there had always been moments when his eyes lingered just long enough to leave room for hope. Tiny moments she had foolishly collected like precious keepsakes. Tonight, she wondered if those moments had meant something after all. Elder Miriam stepped onto the circular platform carved from white granite, raising an ancient wooden staff toward the glowing moon overhead. Her silver hair shimmered almost blue beneath the night sky as her calm voice carried effortlessly through the courtyard. Tonight, we honor the paths written long before any of us took our first breath. May every heart accept truth with courage. The words settled gently over the crowd. Evelyn inhaled slowly, filling her lungs with crisp autumn air scented by cedar, fresh earth, and distant fireplaces. She closed her eyes for only a second, whispering a silent promise to herself. Whatever happened tonight, she would face it with dignity. She would not beg. She would not chase anyone who did not willingly choose her. When she opened her eyes again, Alpha Damian had already turned toward the center of the ceremonial circle, and for reasons she could not explain, every instinct inside her suddenly warned that the life she had imagined was about to disappear beneath the same beautiful moon that had once filled her with hope. Elder Miriam lowered the ancient staff until its polished base rested softly against the white granite platform, and the quiet murmur of the gathered wolves faded into complete silence. Every pair of eyes turned toward the ceremonial circle, where Alpha Damien Blackridge stood beneath the silver glow of the full moon with the calm confidence of someone who believed the future had already been written in his favor. The cool autumn breeze drifted across the courtyard, carrying the scent of pine needles and fresh cedar through the crisp mountain air, as banners embroidered with the black hollow crest fluttered gently above the crowd. Evelyn Carter remained where she had always seemed to belong, just beyond the center of attention, her fingers loosely intertwined before her, while she watched the ceremony unfold with a heart that beat louder than the ceremonial drums. She reminded herself to breathe slowly. Whatever happened, she would meet it with grace. Elder Miriam lifted her eyes toward Damien and smiled warmly. Alpha Damien Blackridge, according to the customs passed down through generations, tonight you may acknowledge the one you choose to stand beside as your future Luna. A respectful hush settled over the gathering. Even the restless children near the back of the courtyard grew still. Damien stepped forward with measured confidence, the polished silver clasp over his chest catching the moonlight each time he moved. His expression remained composed, almost unreadable, until his gaze finally found Evelyn. For one impossible heartbeat, the world seemed to narrow into that single moment. Evelyn felt hope rise quietly inside her despite every warning she had ever given herself. She had spent years expecting nothing, asking for nothing, believing that kindness alone was enough to live a meaningful life. Yet somewhere deep inside, a small part of her had continued to wonder whether she might someday be chosen simply because someone saw her for who she truly was. Damien held her gaze only briefly before looking across the assembled pack. His voice carried clearly through the open courtyard. Tonight, I choose honesty above expectation. Several members of the council exchanged curious glances, uncertain where his words were leading. Damien continued without hesitation. An alpha must think beyond emotion. A leader must choose what strengthens the future of the pack. Evelyn felt the first quiet crack spread through the hope she had carefully protected for so many years. She could not explain why. Nothing had happened yet, but something inside her already understood. Damien slowly turned toward her again, his expression calm rather than cruel, as though he believed his next words required no apology. Evelyn Carter, he said evenly, you are kind, respectful, and honorable. No one questions your character. But kindness alone is not enough for the position beside an alpha. The silence that followed became almost tangible. No one interrupted him. No one objected. Several wolves lowered their eyes, while others watched with uncomfortable curiosity. Damien spoke with the same composed certainty. I cannot choose an Omega whose future cannot support the responsibilities that my position demands. Therefore, before this pack and beneath the witness of the moon, I reject the expectation that you should stand beside me as my Luna. No one gasped. The absence of surprise hurt more than outrage ever could. Evelyn slowly realized that many people had already expected this outcome. Their silence was not shock. It was acceptance. She felt every heartbeat echo inside her chest, yet outwardly she remained perfectly still. The lavender flowers woven into her hair shifted gently with the breeze, releasing their delicate fragrance into the cool night air. Her throat tightened, but she refused to let emotion steal the dignity she still possessed. Elder Miriam lowered her eyes with quiet sadness, though tradition prevented her from speaking against the Alpha's declaration. Around the courtyard, conversations did not immediately begin again. Instead, an uneasy stillness lingered as though everyone waited to see whether Evelyn would plead, cry, or protest. She did none of those things. After several long seconds, she simply inclined her head with calm respect. I understand, she answered softly. Her voice did not tremble. There was no anger hidden within it, only quiet acceptance. She offered no argument because she knew that no words could create a place in someone's heart where none existed. Slowly, she turned away from the ceremonial circle. Each step across the weathered stone felt heavier than the last, yet her shoulders remained straight and her head remained high. Behind her, the ceremony continued beneath the same beautiful moon that had once filled her with hope, while ahead of her, beyond the towering gates of Black Hollow Pack, waited a road she had never imagined she would have to walk alone. Evelyn Carter did not look back. Because some doors closed more completely when they were left behind without a final glance. The towering timber gates of Black Hollow Pack stood open before her, their iron hinges catching the pale moonlight as she crossed the worn stone threshold one quiet step at a time. Behind her, the distant sound of ceremonial drums slowly returned, followed by scattered applause and cheerful conversation, as though the evening had effortlessly continued without the smallest empty space left by her departure. She paused only long enough to inhale the cool mountain air one last time before continuing down the narrow trail that wound through towering pine trees toward the valley below. The familiar scent of cedar, damp earth and wild sage drifted gently through the forest, wrapping around her like an old memory that asked for nothing in return. Above her, the full moon remained bright and impossibly beautiful, untouched by the disappointment that weighed inside her chest. She had imagined walking beneath that same moon beside someone who had chosen her freely. Instead, every footstep echoed alone across the quiet path. Even so, she refused to allow bitterness to follow her into the night. Her grandmother had once told her that resentment was a burden carried only by the person unwilling to set it down. Evelyn had never forgotten those words. She quietly repeated them now, almost like a prayer whispered to the wind. The forest gradually swallowed the sounds of the pack until only nature remained. Leaves rustled high above her, an owl called somewhere beyond the dark treetops, and a gentle stream flowed over smooth stones not far from the trail. The peaceful rhythm reminded her that the world had always been much larger than Black Hollow. Perhaps her future was as well. She tightened the simple shawl around her shoulders as the evening grew cooler. Her small leather satchel rested lightly against her side. Carrying little more than a spare dress, a worn journal, dried herbs, and the hand-carved wooden comb that had belonged to her mother. She had packed those belongings weeks ago without fully understanding why. Something deep inside her had quietly prepared for this moment long before her heart had been ready to accept it. As the path curved around a hillside, she stopped beside a weathered wooden fence overlooking the valley. Countless lights from Black Hollow Pack shimmered below like tiny golden stars scattered across the mountainside. Families gathered together beneath warm rooftops while laughter floated faintly through the crisp autumn air. Evelyn watched in silence, not with envy but with quiet gratitude for the years she had spent there despite everything. The pack had given her shelter, memories and lessons that would remain part of her forever. It simply had never become home. A soft breeze lifted loose strands of her chestnut hair, carrying away the delicate fragrance of the wildflowers woven between the curls. She reached up and carefully removed one small white blossom that had begun to wilt. For a brief moment she considered dropping it onto the path behind her. Instead, she smiled gently and tucked it inside the pages of her journal. Some memories deserved to fade with kindness rather than anger. The trail eventually descended toward an old stone bridge crossing a narrow river that shimmered beneath the moonlight like flowing silver. Evelyn slowed her pace as she stepped onto the bridge, resting one hand against the cool granite railing polished smooth by generations of travelers. The water below whispered peacefully over rounded rocks, reflecting the stars scattered across the clear night sky. She had crossed this bridge many times before while gathering herbs or visiting neighboring farms, but tonight it felt different. Every familiar landmark suddenly belonged to a chapter that had quietly reached its final page. She stood there for several long moments, allowing the cool breeze to dry the tears that had finally escaped without permission. They were not tears of humiliation. They were the gentle farewell to a dream she had carried for far too long. After wiping her eyes, she drew a slow, steady breath and looked toward the winding road stretching beyond the bridge into the unknown. It disappeared between towering evergreens before climbing toward distant mountains she had never explored. There was no map waiting in her satchel, and no destination written in her journal. Only possibility. Evelyn stepped forward without hesitation, believing that wherever the road led next, it would ask her to become someone stronger than the woman who had quietly walked away from Black Hollow. Just as she reached the far side of the bridge, the faint sound of approaching horse hooves drifted through the stillness from somewhere beyond the dark forest ahead. The sound of approaching horse hooves grew steadier with every passing second, measured and disciplined rather than hurried, echoing softly through the quiet forest until the peaceful night seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn Carter instinctively stepped to the side of the narrow road, resting one hand against the smooth stone railing at the end of the bridge. Moonlight filtered through towering pine branches, scattering silver patterns across the winding trail as a line of powerful black horses gradually emerged from the shadows. They moved with remarkable precision, each rider maintaining perfect formation without exchanging a single word. Their polished armor reflected the pale glow of the moon instead of the warm flicker of ordinary lanterns, giving the procession an almost timeless appearance. Long dark cloaks flowed gently behind them in the cool mountain breeze, and each carried the same silver crest embroidered over the heart, a symbol Evelyn did not recognize but somehow felt carried great importance. She lowered her eyes respectfully, assuming they were distinguished travelers passing between distant territories. She had no wish to interrupt their journey. The lead rider raised a gloved hand, and the entire procession came to a smooth halt with such effortless coordination that not even the horses appeared surprised. Their calm discipline spoke of years spent training together. The only sounds that remained were the quiet snorts of the horses and the gentle murmur of the nearby river flowing beneath the bridge. Evelyn waited politely, uncertain whether she should continue walking or remain where she stood. Before she could decide, one of the mounted guards guided his horse forward a few careful steps. His posture remained formal, yet there was no hostility in his expression. Instead, his clear gray eyes studied her with respectful attention, almost as though confirming something he had hoped to find. He inclined his head before speaking. "Forgive the interruption, miss." His voice carried the calm confidence of someone accustomed to duty. "May I ask your name?" The unexpected question caught Evelyn slightly off guard. There seemed little reason for strangers to inquire about her identity on an empty mountain road. Even so, she answered honestly just as she always had. "My name is Evelyn Carter." For the briefest moment, silence settled over the road once again. Several riders exchanged subtle glances, not of confusion but of quiet recognition. The guard nearest her slowly straightened in the saddle, his composed expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Thank you," he replied. "Please remain here for just a moment." He turned his horse toward the magnificent carriage waiting farther back in the procession. Until then, Evelyn had scarcely noticed it hidden behind the mounted escort. Unlike the practical wagons used by most traveling packs, this carriage was crafted from deep polished wood trimmed with silver that shimmered beneath the moonlight. Intricate carvings of wolves, ancient trees, and crescent moons flowed gracefully across its sides, each detail revealing extraordinary craftsmanship. For powerful horses stood harnessed before it, their coats gleaming like midnight silk. The surrounding guards remained completely still, every movement restrained by quiet discipline rather than rigid ceremony. Evelyn felt an unfamiliar sense of curiosity begin to replace the heaviness she had carried since leaving Black Hollow. Whoever traveled inside that carriage clearly possessed remarkable influence, yet there was nothing boastful about the procession. Its dignity came from confidence rather than display. The guard dismounted and approached the carriage door with deliberate respect. He spoke softly to someone inside, words too distant for Evelyn to hear. Several seconds passed. Then the carriage door opened. A polished leather boot appeared first, followed by the steady figure of a tall man descending onto the moonlit road with calm, unhurried grace. He wore a dark traveling coat tailored with understated elegance, its silver fastenings catching the pale light as though woven from the stars themselves. His posture was effortless, his presence commanding without demanding attention. The cool breeze stirred through the forest, carrying the faint scent of cedar and fresh rain as he lifted his eyes toward Evelyn. There was no uncertainty in his gaze, only quiet recognition that seemed impossible between two strangers. He studied her for a single heartbeat before speaking in a deep, composed voice that carried clearly across the silent road. "Evelyn Carter," he said, as though he had spoken her name countless times before. "We have finally found you." The unfamiliar man remained perfectly still beneath the silver glow of the moon, allowing the silence to settle naturally after speaking her name. Evelyn Carter felt the cool night air brush across her face as she searched his features, hoping to find even the faintest trace of recognition, yet she was certain they had never met. His dark hair stirred gently in the mountain breeze, and his calm gray eyes held neither judgment nor curiosity. Instead, they carried the quiet certainty of someone who had finally reached the end of a very long journey. Evelyn tightened her fingers around the strap of her small leather satchel before answering carefully. "I am sorry, sir, but I do not believe we know one another." Her voice remained polite despite the questions racing through her thoughts. The stranger offered a faint smile, one that conveyed respect rather than amusement. "No," he replied evenly. "You have never met me." Before Evelyn could respond, every mounted guard surrounding the carriage moved with flawless precision. One after another, they dismounted from their horses and lowered themselves onto one knee. Heads respectfully bowed toward the man standing beside the carriage. The movement happened so smoothly that it felt almost rehearsed by countless years of discipline. Even the horses remained calm, as though they understood the importance of the moment. Evelyn's eyes widened slightly. She had seen guards salute respected leaders before, but never with such complete devotion. The guard who had first spoken to her placed his closed fist over his heart and lowered his head. "Your Majesty," he said with unwavering respect, "we have found Miss Evelyn Carter exactly where the records predicted." The words echoed softly through the quiet forest. Evelyn blinked once, convinced she had misunderstood. "Your Majesty." Her gaze slowly returned to the man standing before her. He did not correct the guard. He did not acknowledge the title with pride or ceremony. He simply accepted it with the calm composure of someone who had carried such responsibility for many years. The realization settled over Evelyn like the cool night mist rising from the river below. The stranger was no ordinary, noble traveler. He was King Lucian Ashthorne, the legendary Lycan King whose name had traveled through every territory, every mountain settlement, and every distant village she had ever known. Stories about him had reached Black Hollow long before she was old enough to understand politics. People described him as a ruler who united rival packs without needless conflict, who honored ancient traditions while protecting even the smallest communities beneath his crown. Few had ever seen him in person. Most believed he rarely left the royal capital. Evelyn immediately lowered her head in respect. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "please forgive me. I did not realize who you were." Lucian's expression remained gentle. "There is nothing to forgive." His voice carried remarkable warmth despite its quiet authority. Respect offered freely is worth far more than respect given only because of a title. Those simple words surprised her more than the revelation itself. She cautiously lifted her eyes again. There was no arrogance in his posture, no expectation that others should fear him. His presence alone commanded attention without demanding it. The forest around them seemed unusually peaceful, as though even the whispering pines had grown still to witness the meeting. Somewhere above, an owl called into the night before silence returned once more. Evelyn searched his face with quiet confusion. "Your Majesty," she asked carefully, "how do you know my name?" A thoughtful look crossed Lucian's features, as though he had anticipated the question long before this evening. He glanced briefly toward the moonlit road stretching beyond the bridge before returning his attention to her. "Because," he answered calmly, "your name has been part of a promise that began many years before either of us stood on this road tonight." The gentle certainty in his voice left Evelyn with more questions than answers. Yet for the first time since leaving Black Hollow, the emptiness inside her heart gave way to something unexpected. It was not hope. Not yet. It was simply the quiet feeling that the path she had chosen to walk alone might never have been as lonely as she believed. King Lucian. Ashthorne allowed the silence to linger, as though he understood that some truths required space before they could be heard. The moon hung high above the forest, bathing the ancient stone bridge and the quiet river below in soft silver light. A gentle breeze stirred the branches overhead, carrying the scent of pine, fresh rain, and wild lavender through the cool autumn night. Evelyn Carter stood motionless, her thoughts struggling to keep pace with everything that had unfolded in only a few minutes. Less than an hour earlier, she had walked away believing she no longer belonged anywhere. Now the legendary Lycan King stood before her speaking as though her existence had mattered long before this evening began. Lucian slowly clasped his hands behind his back. His posture relaxed despite the unmistakable authority surrounding him. He studied the peaceful valley beyond the bridge before speaking again. "For many years," he said quietly, "the royal archives preserved an ancient record that very few people were permitted to read. It did not speak of kingdoms falling or battles being won. It spoke of a single life whose path would one day change the future of the realm." Evelyn listened without interruption. His words felt deliberate, never dramatic, as though he had repeated them only to himself during countless long journeys. Several years ago, Lucian continued, I instructed trusted members of the royal guard to begin searching every territory under the crown. We visited villages hidden among mountains, coastal settlements, northern forests and isolated valleys. Every lead ended the same way. We arrived too early, too late, or found someone whose story did not match the record. He paused briefly, his calm gaze returning to Evelyn. Until tonight. The quiet certainty in those two words sent a faint chill through the cool evening air. Evelyn lowered her eyes for a moment, trying to understand why someone like him would spend years searching for someone like her. She had never held influence, wealth, or noble blood, at least not that she knew of. She had lived simply, helping neighbors whenever she could, tending gardens, gathering herbs, and believing that ordinary kindness was enough to give a life meaning. Your Majesty, she said gently, I think there must be some mistake. I am only an Omega from Black Hollow. I have never done anything important enough to deserve a search that lasted years. Lucian's expression softened, almost as though he had expected those exact words. That is precisely why so many people failed to find you, he replied. Too many searched for greatness where it could easily be seen. Very few understood that true strength often lives quietly. Evelyn looked at him in thoughtful silence. His words did not sound like empty comfort. They carried the calm conviction of someone who judged people by character rather than reputation. Nearby, one of the royal horses lowered its head to drink from the edge of the river while the guards remained respectfully still, giving their king complete privacy despite standing only a short distance away. Even the forest seemed unusually peaceful, the distant calls of night birds blending gently with the steady flow of water beneath the bridge. Lucian reached inside his traveling coat and carefully removed a small leather case worn smooth by age. He opened it with great care before holding it where the moonlight could illuminate its contents. Inside rested a faded parchment protected beneath clear polished glass. Time had softened the ink, yet one line remained remarkably clear. Evelyn's breath caught as she recognized her own name written across the page in elegant handwriting far older than anything she had ever seen. She instinctively took one hesitant step closer, unable to hide her astonishment. How is that possible? She whispered. Lucian closed the case again before offering a calm smile. That question deserves an honest answer, he said. But not beside a lonely road in the middle of the night. There is far more to your story than anyone in Black Hollow ever knew, including you. If you are willing to trust me, I would like to show you the truth with patience instead of rushing it. Evelyn lifted her eyes toward the quiet road stretching beyond the royal carriage, then glanced back once toward the distant valley where the lights of Black Hollow had nearly disappeared behind the dark pines. For the first time since leaving the pack, she realized that the unknown waiting ahead no longer felt frightening. It felt like the beginning of an answer she had unknowingly been searching for all her life. The peaceful silence of the mountain road broke beneath the distant rhythm of galloping horses, quick and uneven, echoing through the towering pines with unmistakable urgency. Evelyn Carter instinctively turned toward the sound, watching as several familiar riders emerged from the winding trail behind her. Moonlight glimmered across the dark uniforms of Black Hollow Pack, and at their head rode Alpha Damien Blackridge. His horse slowed sharply as the royal procession came into view, its hooves scattering loose gravel across the narrow road before coming to a complete stop several yards away. Damien's confident expression faltered for the briefest moment when he recognized the silver crest displayed upon every royal cloak surrounding the elegant carriage. His eyes shifted from the disciplined royal guard to the man standing calmly beside Evelyn, and a quiet realization settled across his face. He dismounted immediately, his movements noticeably more restrained than before. Every member of Black Hollow Pack followed his example, though uncertainty lingered in their eyes as they faced the most respected ruler in the Lycan Kingdom. King Lucian Ashthorn acknowledged their arrival with nothing more than a composed glance. He neither welcomed nor dismissed them. His calm presence alone filled the moonlit road with quiet authority. Damien stepped forward carefully, placing one hand over his heart in formal respect. Your Majesty, he said, lowering his head. I did not expect to find you traveling through Black Hollow territory. Lucian's expression remained unreadable. Neither did I expect to meet Miss Evelyn Carter on this road tonight, he answered evenly. The simple reply carried no accusation, yet Damien's shoulders grew noticeably tenser. His gaze finally settled on Evelyn. She noticed something different in his expression now. Gone was the detached certainty he had displayed only a short time ago beneath the ceremonial moon. In its place rested quiet hesitation, as though seeing her standing beside the legendary Lycan King had forced him to reconsider something he had believed beyond question. Damien drew a slow breath before speaking again. "Evelyn," he said, his voice far gentler than it had been during the ceremony, "perhaps we should return to Black Hollow and discuss everything with clear minds. The evening has been unexpected." Evelyn looked at him calmly. The words might once have stirred hope inside her, but that hope had already been released beside the stone bridge when she chose to walk away without anger. She did not feel resentment toward him. She simply no longer felt the need to seek his approval. Before she could answer, Lucian spoke with the same quiet composure that had marked every word since their meeting. "Miss Carter is free to make her own decisions," he said. "No one here will choose her path except herself." The statement settled over the gathering like the cool mountain air. "No commands. No threats. Only respect." Damien remained silent for several seconds, studying Evelyn as though seeing her for the first time. He remembered the countless occasions she had quietly helped elderly pack members carry supplies through winter storms, tended injured animals without expecting praise, and shared freshly baked bread with children whose families struggled during difficult harvests. Those memories had always seemed ordinary because she had never asked anyone to notice them. Standing beneath the moonlight now, he wondered how many things he had overlooked simply because they had never demanded his attention. "I may have judged too quickly," Damien admitted at last, his voice low but sincere. "If you are willing, Black Hollow would welcome you back." Evelyn listened carefully, appreciating the honesty behind his words. Yet she also recognized that some invitations arrived only after the door had already closed. She offered him the same gentle kindness she had shown everyone throughout her life. "Thank you," she replied softly. "I truly hope Black Hollow continues to prosper. The people there deserve peace and happiness." She paused briefly, her eyes meeting his without anger or regret. "But I cannot return simply because circumstances have changed." No accusation followed those words. No bitterness lingered within them. They were spoken with quiet dignity, carrying the calm certainty of someone who had finally chosen herself after years of waiting to be chosen by someone else. Damien lowered his eyes, accepting her answer without argument. Around them, the forest remained wrapped in peaceful stillness, while the royal guard watched in respectful silence. Somewhere beyond the dark trees, the first faint breeze before dawn whispered through the branches, carrying with it the unmistakable feeling that the night had quietly turned a page none of them could ever turn back. The first hint of dawn had not yet touched the eastern horizon, but the night no longer felt the same. The forest seemed suspended between one chapter and the next, as though every towering pine and every quiet stream waited for a single decision to shape what came after. Evelyn Carter stood at the center of that stillness, her leather satchel resting lightly against her shoulder, while the cool mountain breeze lifted a few loose strands of chestnut hair across her face. She could still see the distant lights of Black Hollow glowing faintly through the trees behind Alpha Damien Blackridge, yet they no longer called to her the way they once had. They had become part of a life she appreciated but no longer belonged to. Damien remained silent, accepting the weight of her answer with a humility that had not existed only an hour before. His eyes reflected disappointment, but beneath it was something more difficult to face. Understanding. He realized that there were moments when sincere regret could not erase a choice already made. After several quiet breaths, he spoke again, this time without the confidence of an alpha issuing direction. "I never intended to make you feel as though you had no value," he said honestly. "I believed I was making the best decision for the future of the pack. Tonight has shown me that I confuse strength with appearance and leadership with certainty." Evelyn listened without interrupting. His words deserved respect, because they were spoken without excuses. Even so, they could not restore the future that had quietly ended beneath the ceremony's moonlight. She offered him a gentle smile, one touched with gratitude rather than sorrow. "Sometimes we only understand another person's worth after they begin walking a different road," she answered softly. "That does not make either of us a bad person." It simply means our paths were never meant to remain the same. The quiet honesty in her voice settled over the gathering more deeply than any accusation could have. Several members of Black Hollow lowered their eyes, remembering countless moments when Evelyn had quietly offered kindness without expecting acknowledgement. They recalled winter mornings when she delivered warm bread to elderly neighbors before sunrise, afternoons spent tending neglected gardens, and evenings helping frightened children find lost pets deep within the forest. None of those acts had seemed extraordinary at the time because she had performed them with such natural humility. Only now, watching her prepare to leave, did they recognize how much quiet goodness had lived among them unnoticed. King Lucian Ashthorne observed the exchange without speaking. His calm gaze moved from Damien to Evelyn, and there was quiet approval in his expression. He had spent years governing countless packs across the kingdom, and he understood that true character often revealed itself most clearly during moments of farewell, rather than celebration. Evelyn had chosen dignity instead of resentment. Damien had chosen honesty instead of pride. Neither decision erased the past, but both allowed the future to begin without bitterness. Lucian finally stepped forward, the silver embroidery on his dark traveling coat catching the pale moonlight as he approached. "Miss Carter," he said with measured warmth, "before we continue our journey, there is someone I would like you to meet." At his words, an elderly gentleman emerged from the royal carriage. His silver hair rested neatly against the collar of a deep blue cloak fastened with an ancient crescent-shaped clasp. Though his posture reflected many years of service, his bright eyes carried remarkable kindness and quiet wisdom. He descended carefully before stopping several feet from Evelyn. Without hesitation, he placed one hand respectfully over his heart and bowed. Evelyn instinctively took a small step back, surprised that someone who appeared to hold such distinguished rank would greet her with such courtesy. Lucian's voice broke the gentle silence. "This is Chancellor Theodore Whitmore, keeper of the royal archives and guardian of our oldest records." The elderly man lifted his head, studying Evelyn with unmistakable warmth. His smile deepened ever so slightly, as though he had finally met someone he had long hoped to see. "Miss Carter," he said gently, "I have waited many years for the privilege of saying these words to you. Welcome. Your story did not begin tonight. In truth, tonight is only the moment when the first forgotten pages have finally begun to open." Chancellor Theodore Whitmore remained bowed for another respectful moment before slowly straightening, his weathered face illuminated by the gentle silver light that rested across the quiet forest. The lines around his eyes spoke of countless years spent studying forgotten histories rather than seeking recognition, and when he looked at Evelyn Carter, there was no curiosity in his expression. There was only quiet relief. Evelyn found herself returning the gesture instinctively, uncertain how someone she had never met could greet her with such sincere respect. The cool breeze carried the soothing scent of pine and fresh river water between them, while the distant calls of waking birds hinted that dawn was slowly approaching beyond the eastern mountains. "Chancellor," Evelyn said softly, "I am honored to meet you, but I fear you may be expecting someone very different from me." Theodore's gentle smile widened ever so slightly. "That is precisely what every remarkable person says the first time we meet them," he answered kindly. "History rarely introduces itself through those who believe they are extraordinary. It usually begins with those who have quietly spent their lives serving others without asking to be remembered." His words settled gently into the silence. Evelyn lowered her eyes, uncomfortable with praise she did not believe she had earned. Throughout her life, she had simply done what seemed right whenever someone needed help. None of those moments had ever felt important enough to deserve mention. King Lucian Ashthorne watched the exchange with patient calm before turning slightly toward the Chancellor. "Perhaps it is time," he said, "to show her the evidence instead of asking her to accept our words alone." Theodore nodded in agreement. From beneath his deep blue cloak, he carefully lifted a long wooden case secured by polished brass clasps worn smooth with age. Every movement reflected remarkable care, as though what rested inside had survived generations. He slowly opened the lid. Nestled upon dark velvet lay an ancient circular medallion crafted from silver unlike any Evelyn had ever seen. Delicate carvings of wolves running beneath a crescent moon spiraled around its outer edge, while tiny symbols filled the center in patterns that seemed almost alive beneath the moonlight. The metal itself reflected a soft glow despite the absence of direct light. Evelyn instinctively stepped closer, drawn by a quiet familiarity she could not explain. She had never seen the medallion before, yet something deep inside her recognized it in a way that reason could not understand. Theodore noticed her expression immediately. "This artifact has rested within the royal archives for centuries," he explained. "Many scholars attempted to unlock its meaning. None succeeded." He paused before lifting his eyes to meet hers. The oldest records all agreed upon one detail. The medallion would remain silent until the day it stood before the one whose path was forever connected to it. Evelyn looked from the artifact to the Chancellor, then toward King Lucian. "I do not understand," she admitted quietly. Theodore did not answer immediately. Instead, he extended both hands, holding the medallion toward her with great respect. "You do not need to understand," he said gently. "Simply hold it." Evelyn hesitated only for a moment before carefully accepting the cool silver medallion into her palms. It felt surprisingly light, its smooth surface carrying the faint chill of the night air. For several heartbeats nothing happened. She almost smiled with quiet embarrassment, believing the moment had only confirmed that a misunderstanding truly existed. Then, without warning, the intricate symbols engraved across the silver began to shimmer with a soft blue light, delicate as moonlight reflected across still water. A quiet breath escaped from several members of the royal guard, though none spoke. Even Alpha Damien Blackridge remained motionless, his eyes fixed upon the gentle radiance spreading through the ancient artifact. The glow never became overwhelming. It simply grew brighter until every carved line was visible beneath Evelyn's fingertips. She stared down in astonishment, feeling neither fear nor discomfort, only an unexpected warmth that seemed to travel gently through her hands before settling peacefully within her heart. Theodore slowly closed his eyes, emotion briefly touching his composed expression. When he opened them again, his voice carried the quiet certainty of a man watching history unfold exactly as generations had promised. "The archives were correct," he whispered. "After all these years, the first sign has finally awakened." The gentle blue radiance flowing from the ancient medallion illuminated Evelyn Carter's hands like reflected moonlight dancing across still water, soft enough to comfort rather than overwhelm. No sound accompanied the awakening, yet every person gathered on the quiet forest road instinctively understood they were witnessing something that had not happened for generations. The royal guard remained respectfully motionless, while even the horses stood unusually calm, their ears lifted toward the faint glow as though nature itself recognized the significance of the moment. Evelyn slowly lifted her eyes from the artifact to Chancellor Theodore Whitmore, searching his face for an explanation. "What does this mean?" she asked quietly. Theodore drew a measured breath before answering, his voice carrying the careful reverence of a historian speaking about truths preserved across centuries. "The oldest chronicles tell of a bloodline known as the Moonborn," he began. "Not a family, remembered for conquest or wealth, but for wisdom, compassion, and the rare ability to unite wolves who had forgotten how to trust one another. Their descendants were never meant to rule through fear. They were destined to guide through character." Evelyn listened in complete silence, the words sounding more like a distant legend than anything connected to her own life. She had grown up believing she came from an ordinary family that had quietly disappeared when she was still a child. Every memory she carried was simple: a small cottage, a gentle mother who loved wildflowers, a father whose face had become difficult to remember. Nothing about those memories suggested forgotten nobility or ancient promises. Theodore continued carefully. "When the last known members of the Moonborn vanished, the royal archives preserved every surviving record. One passage appeared again and again in manuscripts, written by different historians across different centuries. It spoke of a daughter whose name would be hidden by ordinary life, until the kingdom needed her kindness more than her lineage." Evelyn lowered her gaze toward the softly glowing medallion resting in her palms. The warmth spreading through the silver no longer felt unfamiliar. Instead, it carried a strange sense of belonging that she could not explain. "I am only an Omega," she whispered. "I have never led anyone. I barely knew where I belonged yesterday." King Lucian Ashthorne stepped forward, his expression calm beneath the fading stars overhead. "Leadership is not measured by titles," he said gently. "During our search we gathered stories from every place your footsteps touched. We heard about the elderly widow whose roof you repaired before winter arrived. We heard about the children you comforted after storms frightened them. We heard about the wounded animals you refused to abandon, and the neighbors you helped even when no one thanked you. None of those people knew they were speaking about the same woman. Yet every story carried the same name. Evelyn felt her cheeks warm with quiet embarrassment. Those were simply things that needed to be done, she replied. Lucian's eyes reflected quiet admiration rather than surprise. Exactly, he answered. You never acted because someone was watching. You acted because your heart told you it was right. That cannot be taught. It can only be revealed. Behind them, Alpha Damien Blackridge remained silent, replaying countless forgotten moments in his own memory. He remembered seeing Evelyn carrying baskets of fresh bread through deep snow without complaint, tending gardens that belonged to elderly neighbors, and smiling at strangers who often overlooked her. At the time, he had dismissed those actions as ordinary kindness. Standing beneath the quiet sky now, he understood that what he had called ordinary had been remarkably rare. Theodore carefully reached toward the medallion, but before his fingers touched the silver, a second gentle glow spread across its surface. This time the intricate carvings shifted, revealing a crescent-shaped emblem hidden beneath the original design. The Chancellor's eyes widened with quiet wonder. The second seal, he whispered. I had hoped to see it in my lifetime. Evelyn looked at the newly revealed symbol with growing curiosity. Theodore smiled warmly before meeting her gaze once more. The awakening of the medallion confirms only the beginning, he said softly. The emblem beneath it identifies something even more extraordinary. It tells us that your connection to the Moonborn is not distant history. You are the last living heir of the bloodline the kingdom has been waiting to find. The forest remained completely still, as though the ancient trees themselves had paused to witness the truth finally spoken aloud. Evelyn Carter lowered her eyes to the softly glowing medallion resting in her hands, unable to reconcile the quiet life she had always known with the remarkable history Chancellor Theodore Whitmore had just revealed. The cool silver no longer felt foreign against her palms. Instead, it rested there with a quiet familiarity that stirred forgotten emotions she could not explain. The first rays of dawn began to color the eastern sky with pale shades of blue and gold, while the stars slowly surrendered their place above the mountains. The night that had taken everything from her was giving way to a morning unlike any she had ever imagined. Theodore gently closed the wooden case after the medallion's glow gradually faded into a peaceful silver shimmer. The Moonborn bloodline was never preserved to create rulers above others, he said softly. Its purpose was always to remind the kingdom that compassion is stronger than fear, and that true leadership begins with humility. Evelyn listened carefully, her heart still struggling to accept words that felt too extraordinary to belong to her. I do not know how to be the person you describe, she admitted quietly. I have only tried to be kind whenever I could. King Lucian Ashthorne stepped closer, the morning light catching the silver embroidery along his dark traveling coat. There was no expectation in his calm expression, only quiet understanding. That is exactly why we searched for you, he replied. A title can be inherited. Wisdom cannot. Power can be claimed. Character must be lived every single day. His words settled gently into the cool morning air. Evelyn looked toward the distant valley where the lights of Black Hollow had nearly disappeared beneath the growing daylight. Less than one night earlier, she had believed her greatest disappointment was being left behind by someone she trusted. Now she realized that the future waiting beyond those mountains had never depended upon another person's decision. It had quietly waited for the moment she was ready to walk toward it. Alpha Damien Blackridge remained standing several steps away, his hands resting calmly at his sides. He watched Evelyn with thoughtful silence before finally taking one slow step forward. Every member of Black Hollow instinctively looked toward him, uncertain what he intended to say. Damien stopped a respectful distance from Evelyn and lowered his head. The gesture was small, yet everyone present understood its meaning. It was not offered because of ancient bloodlines or glowing artifacts. It was offered because he finally recognized the worth that had always existed before him. Miss Carter, he said sincerely, I cannot change the choice I made tonight, and I will not ask you to forget it, but I hope you will accept my gratitude for every kindness you gave our pack while we failed to appreciate it. Evelyn felt unexpected warmth replace the last traces of sadness inside her heart. She had never wanted apologies. She had only wanted honesty. She answered with the same gentle grace that had guided every step of her life. Thank you, Alpha Damien. I hope you continue leading Black Hollow with wisdom. The people there deserve someone who learns from every season, including difficult ones. Damien lifted his eyes again, and for the first time since they had known each other, there was no distance between them created by status or expectation, only mutual respect. King Lucian quietly observed the exchange before turning toward his royal guard. Without speaking, he took one measured step away from the carriage and stopped directly before Evelyn. The guards immediately understood what was about to happen. One after another, they lowered themselves onto one knee in complete silence. Chancellor Theodore bowed his head. Even the morning breeze seemed to soften as the entire royal escort offered the same gesture together. Then, before anyone from Black Hollow could fully understand what they were witnessing, King Lucian Ashthorne slowly placed one hand over his heart and inclined his head before Evelyn with calm dignity. His voice carried gently across the peaceful mountain road. The crown does not bow to titles, he said. It bows to the character that earns the loyalty of others. Evelyn Carter, the kingdom has not come to rescue you. We have come to welcome home the woman who has always belonged among us. The morning sun slowly climbed above the distant mountains, washing the quiet forest road in warm golden light that softened every shadow left behind by the night. Dew shimmered across the tall grass beside the ancient stone bridge, and the gentle sound of the river continued its steady journey as though reminding everyone that time never stood still, no matter how deeply a single moment changed a life. Evelyn Carter remained speechless for several heartbeats after King Lucian Ashthorne raised his head. She had spent years believing she was someone easily overlooked, yet the ruler of an entire kingdom had just honored her with a gesture she had never imagined receiving. The quiet humility in his actions touched her far more deeply than any grand declaration ever could. Slowly, she shook her head, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and uncertainty. Your Majesty, she said gently, I do not know how to accept such respect. I have never done anything worthy of it. Lucian offered the same calm smile that had remained unchanged since they first met upon the moonlit road. Respect is not granted because someone believes they deserve it, he answered. It is offered because their life has already demonstrated the values that others hope to follow. His words settled warmly into the crisp morning air. Around them, the royal guard quietly rose to their feet, every movement disciplined yet unhurried. No one applauded. No one celebrated. The silence itself carried greater meaning than any ceremony could have expressed. Chancellor Theodore Whitmore stepped beside Evelyn and carefully accepted the ancient medallion from her hands before placing it safely back inside its polished wooden case. The archives waited many generations for this morning, he said with quiet satisfaction, not because they longed for a lost heir to return, but because they believed the kingdom would one day need someone whose compassion had never been shaped by ambition. Evelyn lowered her eyes thoughtfully. Throughout her life she had measured success by simple things. A neighbor smiling after receiving unexpected help. A frightened child finding comfort. An elderly couple no longer carrying heavy firewood alone. She had never imagined those ordinary moments might someday matter beyond the borders of a small mountain pack. Several members of Black Hollow stood silently watching from across the road. Their expressions no longer reflected surprise alone. Many carried quiet regret mixed with admiration, each remembering acts of kindness they had accepted without ever considering the heart behind them. An older woman who had often received fresh herbs from Evelyn stepped forward first. She folded her hands together and smiled through glistening eyes. Thank you, she whispered. For every winter you checked on us before checking on yourself. Others slowly followed. A young father thanked her for comforting his frightened daughter during a violent thunderstorm years earlier. Another neighbor remembered how Evelyn had quietly repaired a broken garden fence without waiting to be asked. None of the memories involved extraordinary achievements. They were small moments that had quietly woven themselves into the lives of ordinary people. Evelyn felt emotion rise gently within her, not because she sought recognition, but because she realized those simple choices had truly mattered. Alpha Damien Blackridge listened to every word without interruption. As each memory surfaced, he understood more clearly that leadership had never been about standing above others. It had always begun by noticing the quiet strength already living among them. He drew one slow breath before speaking to the gathered members of Black Hollow. "Let this morning become a lesson our pack never forgets," he said sincerely. "May we never again overlook someone's worth simply because it arrives without pride or recognition." His words were met not with loud agreement but with thoughtful silence, the kind that remained long after truth had been spoken. King Lucian glanced toward the royal carriage before returning his attention to Evelyn. "The road ahead is long," he said gently. "There will be time to answer every question you carry, and there will be people waiting to welcome you with open hearts rather than expectations." Evelyn looked once more toward the valley where Black Hollow rested peacefully beneath the brightening sky. There was no anger left inside her, only gratitude for the chapter that had shaped her into the woman she had become. With one final peaceful smile, she quietly accepted that some endings existed only to guide a person toward the place where they had truly belonged all along. The royal carriage began to move with quiet grace along the winding mountain road, its polished wheels rolling gently across the ancient stones as the first full light of morning spread over the forest. Sunbeams filtered through towering pines, turning every dewdrop into a tiny point of gold, while birds welcomed the new day with cheerful songs that drifted through the cool air. Evelyn Carter sat beside the open carriage window, watching Black Hollow slowly disappear behind the distant hills. She expected to feel sadness as the place she had called home faded from view, yet what settled inside her heart was something gentler. It was gratitude for every lesson, every hardship, and every quiet act of kindness that had shaped her into the woman she had become. She realized that even painful chapters could become precious when they prepared someone for a future they never imagined possible. Across from her, King Lucian Ashthorne remained quietly attentive, allowing the peaceful silence to comfort rather than overwhelm. He understood that some journeys did not begin when a traveler stepped onto a road. They began when a person finally believed they were worthy of walking it. After several peaceful miles, the forest gradually opened into rolling green valleys where wildflowers stretched across the landscape beneath the brilliant morning sky. Small villages rested comfortably among the hills, their residents beginning another ordinary day without realizing that history quietly traveled along the road before them. Evelyn smiled softly as she watched children wave toward the passing royal escort. Several guards returned the greeting with warm smiles of their own, revealing that even disciplined warriors carried gentle hearts beneath polished armor. Chancellor Theodore Whitmore carefully removed the ancient medallion from its wooden case once more, though this time its silver surface remained peacefully still. He looked toward Evelyn with quiet satisfaction. "There is no need for signs every day," he said kindly. "The greatest proof of who you are has never been the light within this medallion. It has always been the light you carried into other people's lives without expecting anything in return." Evelyn reflected upon those words while gently touching the pressed white wildflower resting safely between the pages of her journal. She had gathered it before the ceremony, believing it represented a simple hope that had quietly faded beneath the moonlight. Now she understood it represented something far more meaningful. Flowers did not question whether they deserved to bloom. They simply opened toward the light when the season arrived. She closed the journal with a peaceful smile. Far behind the royal procession, Alpha Damien Blackridge remained standing upon the old stone bridge long after the carriage had disappeared from sight. The morning breeze carried the scent of pine through the valley, as he quietly watched the empty road stretching toward the northern mountains. For the first time since becoming Alpha, he understood that the strongest leaders were not those who always made perfect decisions, but those willing to learn from the ones they wished they could change. He turned back toward Black Hollow with renewed purpose, determined that every member of his pack would be valued not for status or appearance, but for the kindness they brought into the lives of others. High above the valley, the road climbed toward distant cliffs where the magnificent towers of the royal Lycan capital slowly emerged through the morning mist. Their silver rooftops shimmered beneath the rising sun like stars resting upon the earth, welcoming travelers from every corner of the kingdom. Evelyn gazed at the breathtaking city with quiet wonder, realizing she was no longer walking toward someone else's dream. She was stepping into her own future for the very first time. King Lucian followed her gaze before speaking with the calm certainty that had accompanied every word since they met. "Destiny rarely arrives when life feels comfortable," he said gently. It often waits just beyond the moment we believe everything has been lost. Evelyn looked toward the endless horizon ahead, feeling hope rise naturally within her, not because someone powerful had chosen her, but because she had never allowed disappointment to change the kindness that defined her heart. As the royal carriage continued toward the shining capital beneath the bright morning sky, the road ahead seemed to promise not an ending, but the beginning of a story that future generations would remember whenever they needed to believe that true worth is always discovered by those who refuse to stop walking toward the light.